Hello, and welcome to Politics and Prose. My name is Alan Watke. I'm the director of events here. Before we get started, can I ask you all to silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event? And when we get to the Q&A, there's a microphone right here. Please line up there and ask your questions into the microphone. We are live streaming and filming tonight's event. Tonight, I'm very honored to welcome Lauren Francis-Sharma to celebrate the release of her newest novel, Casualties of Truth. Lauren Francis-Sharma's previous two novels have established her as a deft chronicler of history and in its intersections with flawed humans struggling to find peace in unjust circumstances. With keen insight and gripping tension, Casualties of Truth explosively mines questions of whether we are ever truly able to remove the stains of our past and how we may attempt to reconcile with unquestionable wrongs. Lauren Francis-Sharma is the author of Book of Little Acts, a finalist for the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and the critically acclaimed novel Till the Well Runs Dry. She was a McDowell Fellow and is the Assistant Director of Bread Loaf Writers Conference in Middlebury College. Francis-Sharma will be in conversation with Kwame Alexander, a poet, educator, publisher, Emmy Award-winning producer, #1 New York Times bestselling author of more than 40 books, which also includes The Undefeated, which is the National Book Award nominee, Newbery Honor, and Caldecott Medal-winning picture book. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Lauren Francis-Sharma and Kwame Alexander.
You guys came in the snow. I love it. Thank you.
Good evening. How y'all doing? Good. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Congratulations. Let's give it up, y'all, on this wonderful book. Well done. So, I've been following you on social, and you've had a really, just brilliant launch to this book. All the coverage in the Times and USA Today and People and Washington Post. So, I got a question for you. These are going to be really open-ended questions. I decided I wasn't going to write down any questions, I'm just going to feel it out. So my first question is, I read one of the reviews. I'm not going to say which one, USA Today. And I was a little bit frustrated. I spent 12 years writing a novel about Ghana, and the reviewer pretty much gave away everything in the book. And I was so upset, I wrote a letter to the magazine. I was like, please pull this review. They haven't reviewed any more of my books. I read the USA Today blurb/review. Don't y'all read it yet until you finish the book. And I felt like it gave away too much. What'd you think?
It gave away too much. I think there's several reviews that did that. I know it's a teaser, but this is a suspenseful novel, and there are things that you don't want to be told early. And some of the reviews definitely gave them away. Yeah.
Exactly. So do not read that review until you finish the book. There's a poet by the name of Hakeem Madhubuti from the Black Arts Movement. And he wrote a book in 1968 called The Book of Life. And it's one poem. It's 48 pages. It's 92 sections. It's one poem. And one of my favorite is, hate is also creative. It creates more hate. I feel as though that is a significant theme in your book. You could almost say violence is also creative. And I wonder, is that a question you're asking in this book, or are you answering that question?
I think it's a question I'm asking. Does violence beget violence? Does hate beget hate? I think these characters that you're meeting are people who have complex pasts. They're struggling with things that they've been through. One of them is trying to let those things go. And I think unraveling that, is really hard, especially when you are coming from a society like ours, like South Africa, where, violence is part of the fabric of the society.
You deal with a lot of different issues in this book. The Black body, you deal with apartheid, family, love. When I finished the book, I felt like I had been informed, entertained, and in a way, I had almost forgotten that this was a mystery/thriller. Like, I learned a lot about the Truth and Reconciliation hearings. I learned a lot about the aftermath of apartheid. And then I went back and read the first chapter again, and I said, oh my, mind blown. And so, did this begin as a thriller? Did this begin as a literary novel? Did this begin as a commercial novel? You somehow bended all of these things together.
I like that. I take that as a compliment. So when I first started thinking about this book, was many, many years ago, and I thought, let me try to write this as a literary novel. And I realized it was getting very heavy. And I thought, no one's going to finish this book if I make it a 400, 500-page literary novel on apartheid. So I thought to myself, how am I going to do this so that people will actually not want to put the book down? And that first chapter, which you're talking about, was sort of the opening that I thought would bring people in and make you want to question, like, what is this story about? And of course, I used thriller craft, suspense craft to pull people in. But ultimately, what I wanted you to do is to leave knowing more about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I wanted you to know about apartheid. I wanted you to know about the after effects of this place, because when Mandela was freed and we had those elections, everyone thought we were good. Like, this is over, right? Apartheid's done. But that, as we know here, like, it's not over. It's not done. The after effects live on and on and on. And I hope that I show that through these characters.
You made it very personal for us, which I think is important if you're trying to get us to understand something that happened that was very tragic, and to be able to sort of deal with it in a way that we haven't been dealing with it, especially as we confront some of these very similar things that are happening in our own country. So that's sort of my next question. It's almost as if you were a prophet. So there's a section I would like you to read to us, if you wouldn't mind. It's on page 70. And it starts at the top with "we preach," and it ends at the ellipses about 11 lines below it. And I would like you to read that to us. And y'all listen to this, and I want y'all to sort of think about where we are in this country right now.
We preach segregation and practice it. And in America, you preach integration, but deceitfully practice segregation. He laughed a rueful laugh. I don't know if that's true, and I don't know where this country is going. I know only that when I'm here, surrounded by people who have done these horrible things, I don't think I can live in peace simply because they confess. We already know everything they're telling us. They killed our heroes, our families, so they could try and break the spirit of a whole people. Losing this country, they say, is justice enough, but those men testifying at the hearings are boastful, and sometimes I just want to.
So we are all dealing with a certain level of uncertainty, frustration, in the midst of this chaos and crisis that we find ourselves. Do you see a lot of similarities in what you wrote and what many of us, all of us, are dealing with and going through? And B, was that something you set out to do?
No, the publicity gods actually gave me a gift. Who knew Elon Musk was going to come around and apartheid was going to be in the news every minute, right? I didn't know, but I also knew that what happened in 1996 when I was at the hearings and sitting through it needed to be told. And if I was remembering it every day since then, and if it was staying with me for this long and I was carrying around those notepads that I'd written these notes in for almost 30 years, then I knew that it had to have some resonance for other people. I didn't know it was going to be this close. It cuts to the bone now.
Do you feel as though your job as a writer, what is your job as a writer?
Wait, you're done? That's it?
That's it. What is your job as a writer in particular right now?
I mean, you know, I was in South Africa in January, and we didn't have a title for this book yet. And I was at my friend's house, and I was laying in the bed in the guest room, and she was fast asleep, and her daughter was asleep, and I was struggling really with what we were going to call this book. And I started to Google like Mandela quotes, and I kept seeing the words casualties, and I kept seeing the word truth. And I put them together, and I was like, oh, right. Truth, right? I mean, it's at the heart of this. And I think that's what I've done with my other two books, and I think that that's what I really wanted to do here, was tell the truth. I mean, if you look at the beginning of the book, I use an Ida B. Wells quote, right? Which I'm going to open it up to right now, which says what? The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. That's been around for a really long time, right? She was a journalist, she was a writer. The important thing that we do, the most important thing that we do, I think, is tell the truth, even through fiction, most importantly through fiction.
So, well, then what about hope? As a writer, do you have any responsibility to move beyond the truth and leave us with some hope?
You tell me, did I leave you with hope at the end of the book?
No. You know what you left me with?
What's that?
You left me with Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower. In order to rise from its ashes, the phoenix must first burn. You left me with, okay, here's the truth. It's all, you know, it's a wrap. You did this and now we got to do this. I don't know. That's my interpretation. What are your thoughts? You wrote it.
So, yes, I agree that...
And I'm not judging. I'm not saying that's wrong. No. I'm just saying that's what I took it as.
Yeah, no, I think that there's some truth to that. I think that, you know, I think there's one way to look at this book and to see some of the hopelessness. But, you know, the thing that I really love about the story of South Africa and apartheid and overcoming what they did was that it's about community, right? I mean, they coalesced, they came together, and we're not just talking about, you know, the Black people in South Africa. We're talking Asians, we're talking coloreds, we're talking many white people who decided enough was enough, right? And they fought for 50 years over and over and over again. And then they had us join as well. And then they had European countries join as well. Like eventually the whole world began to turn against this country in order to help, you know, these people. I think that that's where the hope resides. I think that community, the bigger, greater community of the world, but also within that place, is how you overcome, how we resist. Do I feel hopeless about what's happening here? Some days, yeah. But I also think to myself, well, you know what? Nobody thought the National Party was going to stay in power that long. 1948, they win this election, and everyone's shocked. They're a far, far right party. And
sound familiar.
Sounds familiar. And then they're in it, and they do a lot of dismantling, a lot of regulation passing of the worst kind, which we know. It wasn't just hoses and pulling people in jail, right? We're talking murder, we're talking kidnapping, we're talking real suppression of the kind that we don't often know. We're talking about manipulation of the media. And all of these things are blueprints for us. It's right here. It's, it's Googleable. We can see what can happen easily. Let's pay attention. So that's hope, I hope.
That is hope. Okay, you're right. In order to have hope, you first must have truth. And I think you did a really magnificent job of not being didactic, of really creating this beautiful narrative, this wonderful story.
Thank you.
You use epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter, and I love that. Like, that's something I try to often do in my poetry books. This stood out to me, and I'd like you to respond to it. This is the epigraph at the beginning of chapter 21. There is nothing more difficult than waking someone who is only pretending to be asleep. Desmond Tutu. I just want you to respond to it.
Yeah, well, we have many, many people who are fully aware of the terrors that are happening right before them. And they're pretending they can't see it. And we think it's our job to keep reminding them and to keep saying, hey, pay attention. But how difficult is it when they're just lying to us about not seeing it? Happened in South Africa, happening here.
One of my favorite songs is a song by Hugh Masekela, Grazing in the Grass.
Yes, mine too.
Why insert that song? What was the meaning behind that? How did it resonate with you?
Yeah, well, I love that song. Hugh Masekela was a South African jazz artist. He had to leave South Africa after the Sharpeville massacre. It was just really hard for artists to actually be able to perform and to have, viable careers. So he came to the United States, and he played with some of our great jazz artists. And one of the things about that song in particular is that it's got a very sort of American jazziness about it, but it's also particularly African. The cowbells in the front, in the beginning of the song, which actually we might have it, so we'll see if we can play it at some point. But it's got cowbells, and it's a Zulu cowbell that he uses in it. So there's this real melding of these two countries in that song, and I thought, this is perfect. This is perfect for that particular scene, and it's probably the most harrowing scene in the book when that song shows up. So I'll leave it to you when you read it, but you'll see what I mean.
Well, that song is it's a jazz song. It's African, it's South African, and it's jazz, and it's got some blues in it. And we know that the blues is sort of this optimism without being naive. And so yet another example of you sort of exposing the truth and saying, people, here it is. Now, what are you going to do with this information?
Okay, I'll take that. Yeah, that works.
No, it's a really brilliant book. I mean,
Thank you.
I'm give it up, y'all. Give it up. Would you like to read some of it to us?
Sure, yeah, why not? I'm just going to read from, just so you know, the main character is a woman named Prudence, and she's the intern in South Africa in 1996 who sits through the Truth and Reconciliation amnesty hearings. And she's back home, 20 plus years later. She lives a very nice life. It's Washington, D.C., 2018. Swollen nuggets of ice fell from the August sky as if to announce summer's refusal to be predictable. A street lamp flickered through the hail-battered windshield of their car as Prudence's husband, Davis, slowed and turned with the road, hugging the edge of the curb. They were late for dinner. Their sitter, Alice, had arrived 30 minutes after the agreed upon time, and before leaving, Prudence had needed to make sure Alice recalled all the steps for putting Roland to bed, the music to be played, the position of his pillow, the way his curtains were to be drawn and pinned. After, Prudence and Davis had argued about which of the cars to take into the district. Given the forecast, Prudence thought it best to drive the minivan, but Davis insisted on the Porsche. It was a 1959 Porsche Carrera Speedster, cherry red, an exact replica of the car and the poster Prudence had taped beside her childhood bed, beneath the off-the-wall cover shot of Michael Jackson. She had long dreamt of this car, and when they first began discussing it, Davis admitted he had never considered such a luxury. He had been easily persuaded, however, when he spied the creamy leather seats with barely a crease. They paid the previous owner with a personal check, and the seller threw in an elegant pair of women's driving gloves, one of which Prudence now flipped inside out, using the fleece to gently wipe condensation from the windshield as Davis reduced his speed. "Damn, I can't believe how big this hail is," Davis whispered. "It's going to cost thousands to get these dents fixed. We should let the restaurant know we're going to be late," she said. They were meeting the new IT genius Davis's firm had recently hired. Davis had been tasked with helping him on board, with making him feel welcome, since he had recently moved from Sweden for the position. Davis seemed now to have forgotten all about the man as the tail of the car began tarrying, the back left tire spinning like a pinball. He veered hard to the right, stopping forcefully alongside the curb. The car settled into itself, the engine at a low purr. "Shit, did you see that?" Prudence rolled down her window, wiped the side mirror with the glove. In it, she saw the shadowy figure of something lumbering onto the sidewalk. "Is it a child? Or a dog? I think maybe it's a fox." Davis turned off the engine. They were parked beneath a cherry tree with a thick canopy that deepened the darkness of that already dark night. He switched on his cell phone light. "What are you doing?" she said. "I'm going to check on it." "Then what? Perform CPR on a fox?" "Prue, you don't leave a thing to bleed out." Davis wrenched the door handle and rushed to the rear of the car. The street light flickered, illuminating broken tree limbs that dangled precariously over the hood. Prudence's annoyance was evolving, changing rapidly into anger as she considered Davis's impetuousness, his lack of forethought, as if he couldn't imagine what harm could come to a black couple on a dark road. Now she heard the animal howling, the sound muffled yet urgent. She imagined its sallow eyes and hanging head, imagined the staggering profundity of its fear. A sickening feeling swept over her, and she slapped her hands against her ears, trying not to hear its cry, trying not to be reminded of all her own dead. Davis returned. "It's a dog, so much blood." He was breathing heavily, attempting to switch off the phone's flashlight, but his hands trembled. "Do you have blood on your shoes?" "What?" Davis said this as though suddenly waking. He wiped droplets of rain from his face. "Blood." Prudence reached for his phone, turned off the light. "Do you want me to drive?" As the street light flickered again, Davis started the car, and Prudence made the call to report the injured dog. "Does it look like someone's pet?" The woman's voice boomed through Prudence's phone. "No," Prudence answered. Yes, it does," Davis said. Annoyed, Prudence began to push the phone toward Davis when they heard a new, unusual sound. "Hello," the woman on the phone said. There was a low, thick growl beneath the rumble of the Porsche's engine. Prudence peeped through the side mirror, thinking the dog had staggered to its feet, but she saw nothing from the street light before the street light went out again. The growl, however, blanketed them. "Hello, is everything okay?" the woman said. The street light flickered back on and flooded the road with a soft, creamy light, only to reveal a man at the front of the car. His reddened eyes seemed to rattle in his head until his sight settled on Prudence. Her breath suspended in her chest, the sound of it like a shovel scraping a large rock. Davis reached for her hand, and together they watched the man. The wool of his coat lay flat and matted. The mud stains on his left cheek and across the backs of his large hands were caked and crusty. "If you're still there, we'll send someone out as soon as possible," the woman said. Prudence tried not to move, hoping this would deter the man from moving too, but he inched forward. She thought to tell Davis to pull off, but before she could get the words out, the man placed his hands on the hood of the car, leaning over at the waist while the growling, his growling, grew all the more menacing.
That reminds me, Lauren, that there are multiple mysteries in this book. And when you discover that one, like that's not even the main one. You've been off the sort of, you haven't been out in public in about 11 years. Tell us about your sort of background, how you get to the point where you're able to craft such a marvelous book like this. Where did your writing journey begin? If you started as an attorney, how'd you get here?
We don't have that much time. Let's see. So, wanted to be a writer, decided to be a lawyer, which was fine. I think I enjoyed my practice for a while. Should I tell my story? I'm going to tell my story. Okay, I'm going to tell my story.
Tell your story.
So,
You got 3 minutes.
So I'm in New York. I'm working. I've told this story before, so for those of you who know this story, forgive me. But I'm in New York. I'm at a firm. I'm working really hard on a deal. It's the middle of the night. Weeks and weeks go by. I haven't slept much, and it's Sunday, or it's Saturday. And on Sunday, my senior associate wants to go to the football game because the New York Jets were in the playoffs or something. And so he tells the client who's coming in from London, Kwame's moving to London, so I'm emphasizing that. He says to the client, "Hey, Lauren's going to manage the rest of this. I'll be in on Monday, and we'll close the deal then." And the client looks at him and says, "You're leaving me with the effing coat check, girl?" So I have a moment. I go to my office and I decide I'm going to get my coat and I'm going to walk out of this office right now. Like, I just need to get myself together. So I walk down the street, 3rd Avenue, and I go to a bookstore, which shall not be named. And I go into the stacks and I cry. And I know I have to get back to work. So I come downstairs and in the lobby, I see this man. And I'm like, I know this man. And it's Stephen King. And I'm a huge Stephen King fan. And I know him. And I go up to him and I say, "Oh my God, I love you." And he looks at me like I'm the only Black woman who's ever declared her love to him. And he just kind of nods. But I walk out and I am just so excited, right? I'm like, I've just met Stephen King. And I remember I called my dad and I was like, "Dad, I just met Stephen King." But I left there that day and I was like, you know what? These people took away the one thing that I love, which was reading. Like, I let them take all of my time. I didn't write, I didn't read, I didn't do anything that I enjoyed anymore. So after that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to actually come home at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm just going to sit down and I'm just going to start writing again. And so I started writing again. I didn't get that book published, but I ended up getting the next one published. So, but yeah, I think ultimately I just decided that I wanted this thing for myself again. And when I had the kids and I ended up staying home a little longer, I had the ability to sort of sit for a bit and think about what it is that I wanted to do. And I tried it and it worked. So.
And what year was this?
The Stephen King story? Mm-hmm. That was 1998.
98.
And it took me until 2014 for my first book to come out.
And you had attended the Truth and Reconciliation hearings in 96?
96.
And you took a plethora of notes?
some reason, I didn't know I was actually going to be like a writer. It was something about being there that I knew was really important. Like I just kept writing. I didn't know what I was going to do with those books, and I didn't throw them away. I thought I wrote every word down that I heard, every single word. I mean, you should see it. Like, you know, just scribble this person's name. Some of the names were written wrong, and I didn't quite know what they were until later. But like, I wrote everything down, and I just kept taking those notepads with me, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But when I published that first book, I thought to myself, maybe one day I'll tell this story. Just maybe. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but maybe one day.
And where'd you keep the notes?
In a box in the basement.
A box in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
Was the box protected?
No.
Wow. Marita Golden,
superstar,
acclaimed novelist, memoir mentor to a lot of us,
including me.
She has a book that just came out
yesterday
called How to Become a Black Writer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ask you a question that I believe Charlie Rose or Colbert asked Toni Morrison, and then I'll ask you a second part. Do you consider yourself to be a Black writer? And what do you think your role is, if the answer is yes, as a Black writer?
Yeah. Yes, I consider myself to be a Black writer. But I think that being a Black writer means I'm a writer, right? And I feel like, you know, our stories are universal. And so...
Say that again.
Our stories are universal. And I don't think that anyone who's read any of my previous books can look at them and not find ways to see the humanity in my characters and to see their own connection with it. Doesn't matter who you are and where you're from. And my job thus far has been, oh, there's Marita's book. I love it. Ah, yay. Can we give Marita a round of applause? Love it. Marita, this is what, how many novels, how many books have you written? Number 22. Yes, number 22. Yes, it's amazing. Marita and I have lunch on occasion, and she...
We were very honored to nominate you for the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and Hurston Wright is celebrating 35 years this year.
Oh, yes, I love it. You know what's also 35 years to yesterday? That was 35 years the day Mandela walked out of prison.
Oh, wow.
Yesterday, February 11th. So, so it's a huge...
And that's one of those days that everybody can remember where they were.
Yes.
As they watched the television set, watching him.
That's right. Yeah, it was a big, big moment for the world. Absolutely.
Let's open it up to some questions from the audience. Feel free to use the mic right here. Or, yep, come on over.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Tanya. She's a most marvelous. Tanya James is a marvelous, marvelous novelist and short story writer. Like, if you don't know her, you need to know her. Tanya's one of my favorite writers ever.
I'm so happy to have this novel finally. I'm such a fan. I just love your first two books so much. And I am so intrigued by this idea that you were carrying notebooks around for 30 years. And I guess I'm wondering two things, like what was stopping you? Like were there points where you tried to use that material and couldn't do it? And then I guess I'm always curious about what's that moment where you figure it out in some way, at least in the beginning. You're like, I know my way in now. Yeah. So that's just why I was wondering.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, I kept trying to figure out like how I was going to tell this story. And I said this there's a Washington Post piece that's sort of a Q&A that came out yesterday, and I said this in there, but it's really true. I've been telling this story about being in South Africa for years, and every time I would tell it, people would recoil. Like I'd be like, oh, so, I sat through the hearings and, these people were telling these horrible stories, and I would just see like people just like, I don't want to know. And that scared me. Like, how am I going to tell a story that people don't really want to hear, right? Like, who's going to open this book? And I just kept trying to figure out, there's got to be a way in here. And I think And also, the big fear too is telling a story about South Africa and for South Africans and I'm not South African, right? So I also had to figure out a way to tell a story about an American looking at this and being able to draw her own conclusions about her life, her country, and what she saw while she was there, but not from a South African perspective, because I do believe they need to tell their own stories, honestly. So when I began to sort of figure out that like she was the way in, this woman who was very much like me, sitting there, taking all this in, I thought maybe I can do something with this. And it was COVID, frankly, that gave me a little bit of space to figure it out. We were all stuck in the house, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna take those boxes up from the basement. I'm gonna try to figure this out. So yeah, I had the time and I had the person, the right person. Yeah, thank you. Hi there.
Hi, I'm so excited.
You're so tall.
I'm so excited to read the book. I bought it, so I'm really excited. Was in South Africa for a wedding for 2 weeks in October, and I'm the second part is important. A PhD student in a history department, and I study Black history, the 19th century. And I found my time in South Africa, in Cape Town, in Stellenbosch, to be really heavy for multiple reasons historically, but also the land itself, like the atmosphere felt heavy. And I've done archival research in Mississippi. I've been in other very heavy places, but I was just wondering what about the indescribable atmosphere of your time there as a young lawyer and then later in your life, how did that feed into the book? Yeah. The kind of intangible things.
Yeah, thank you for that. And PhD student?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yay, I love it. Congrats. Yeah, being in South Africa reminds me, or at the time, I remember being there in 1996 and thinking to myself, this must be what it feels like to be in 1950s America, right? Like there was this quality of, they didn't quite deal with things in the way that like we dealt with them. Like it was very under the surface, very subversive. And I agree with you, it felt very heavy. I remember feeling incredibly lonely there. Like I just couldn't quite find my footing. But there was something, after many months, I started to see that like there was so much hope and working and being able to see this new constitution that they put together, using our constitution as a basis, but also trying to make their constitution even better than ours, like make it work better, left me feeling like, you know what, these people might actually figure this out before we figure this out. Because, and if you notice what's happening right now, I don't know if you all are paying enough attention to white South Africans in particular, right, who are living there right at this moment. They're very angry about Elon Musk and what he's saying about what's happening there. Those people are there. Many of them have stayed, and they believe in the vision of the society that Mandela had laid out for them. Like they are trying really hard. Is it all of them? Absolutely not. Are there far right fringe people? Absolutely. And frankly, those are the ones that Elon Musk is listening to. But there is this connectedness, this feeling of we are going to make this work that I feel is very similar to sort of how Black Americans are here. Like, we're gonna push this and push this and push this. And even though everything just feels really horrible at moments, there is this underlying of hope. And to me, that rose above the feeling of like heaviness eventually. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Hi, Carol.
How are you doing? Congratulations,
Thank
first
you.
of all. Glad I was able to make it. Yeah, it was a journey. But anyway, I have tons and tons and tons of questions. I've read the book, But I am going to ask you, I'm going to pick one, and that's going to be about Prudence's dad. And I'm not going to give away anything
We're not
about
gonna
it.
let you.
I beg your pardon?
Don't worry.
You're not gonna you can cut my mic, right?
Yep.
I got you. But I think I can mention that her parents are from the Caribbean. And I wondered like how important that was to you and how you wanted that to shape like Prudence, who she was and how she responded to things that happened in her life.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that I think is really important for me as a writer is trying to pull the thread. In my last book, I wrote about, it was 1700s, 1800s, and it was about the Caribbean and also this connection to the United States, or what would become the United States. We forget how connected we are, right? We forget that like Africans and Caribbean people and Black Americans are, are all very much the same people. And I think I'm constantly trying to sort of, remind people of how this thread runs through. And so making Prudence an American, but also who has Caribbean roots and who's when she's in South Africa, she's thinking to herself, oh, I understand this place, not just from my American perspective, but I also understand this place from being the child of people who grew up in a country that was mostly Black people, right? And so she's able to understand different things than maybe someone who didn't have that experience. And I wanted to bring that layeredness to her, because I think many of us live these incredibly intersectional like identities, right? I mean, we're American, but we're this, and we're, Caribbean, but we're also this. And so, and I feel like we make our characters almost too simplistic sometimes. Like readers can hold more than one identity, and we all do it, right? And that's what we're trying to like get people to understand, is that we all have these multiple identities. Her son, as you all know, is on the spectrum. He's a young boy, he's a young Black boy. All of that plays into, into this moment that they have at his private school. But he's also a kid that, that's loving and challenging and all those other things. Like we can hold those. And so I think the Caribbean aspect of that for me was about making sure that that I have these very layered, interesting characters who, who can do more than one thing and be more than one thing on the page. Thanks, Carol.
And you also manage not to be judgmental about the characters. Even the Afrikaners who were on trial. At one point, you even talk about how they were doing their jobs. They had to do their job. They worked for the government. So it's just, just well done.
Thank you. Hi, Marita.
You mentioned that we periodically have lunch.
Yes.
And I remember the lunch several years before the most recent lunch. And there was a lot of despair. You were at a particular point in your career. And there was so many questions about the future and about this book. Yeah. And when we had lunch a couple of months ago, all of that, the sun had come out, and I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So happy. And this is a question not about the book, but about writing and teaching. In my 40-year career as a writer and teacher, I've mentored and taught so many people who used to be lawyers. And my feeling is that lawyers are essentially storytellers. What is it about the story that you're required to tell as a lawyer that drives you out of law into creative writing?
That's a good question. I've thought a lot about that. I'm not sure I have a good answer, Marita. I really don't. I think there are, I think the law is an incredibly powerful space for people who want to think deeply, who want to many times act in service to others.
The same things that writers
The
want to
same
do.
things that writers do, right? And I think the law sometimes doesn't leave space for that other side of yourself. I remember writing was really challenging in law school because I wanted to be more creative, and they was trying to like beat that out of me. And I remember it was such a struggle. And I was a good writer, like I was a strong writer, but I was struggling with how to write as a lawyer. And but ultimately, I think that there's so much that I got from being a lawyer that I bring to this. This book couldn't have been written without my legal background. It just couldn't. Understanding, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, understanding, even the non-judgmental part that you just mentioned. Like, I'm able to see both sides of things very often because of my training. I'm able to argue, and I think be fair in the way that I present things because of my training. So I'm thankful. Like, I don't have any regrets about
That's
it.
a wonderful answer. And that's the first time I've heard a lawyer who became a writer say that. Because so many lawyers tell stories of very arbitrary, the nature of law. I'm suing you, I've got to win. And they found that strangling. I love to hear stories of people who love the work that they did. And I agree with you. Your background as a lawyer definitely helped you with that.
Thank you. Thank you. One of my old bosses is here, so I didn't want to talk about it.
Last two questions.
All right, I'm gonna just make this really quick. Hi, my name's Kanye Walden. I'm a freshman over at Howard University. Been writing about 4 years now, poetry and fiction. I heard about this event like very last minute, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go. And so I just started like super studying like your books really quickly, and I was like, okay, I really like the way that she writes.
Thank you.
And something that you had said earlier about this person when you were talking about this book and the things that you were listening to in the hearings with apartheid, and how you could see how people were kind of going back a little bit. I find like in writing things where I'm telling stories, whether they're personal experiences or historical events that are relevant to the message that I'm writing, I find myself going like, oh wait, what if people don't receive that, or what if that's too harsh, or oh maybe that's not going to be well received. So my question to you would be, how do you keep yourself from wanting to draw away from that, and then also how do you maintain writing within your natural language and the way that you just naturally write?
Yeah. I sort of mentioned this earlier, but I trust enough. I trust in myself enough to know that, like, if I'm interested in something, somebody else might be interested in something. So, and that it takes a minute, I think, to kind of get there, to trust that, like, you might be able to judge for others what maybe they don't even know they're interested in yet. And so I think for me with this book, I was afraid, right? I mean, I did have moments, and partially because it's tough stuff to write about. So actually just staying in the moment and being able to sort of push. But I also knew that I couldn't be overly emotional with it. I had to sort of like lay it out the way that I'd written it in my books. And having that raw material was very heavy. Where it's very easy for me in some respects because I wrote it like a transcript. And so you'll see when you read it that it reads very much like, this is what this person said, this is what this person said. And on occasion, you'll see Prudence sort of respond to it. But ultimately, I wanted to lay it out so that you could just see what they were saying without me having to embellish, without me having to add much more, just the raw words. And even if you see what's happening now in this country, right? It doesn't need any interpretation. They're telling you exactly what they're thinking. They're saying it right there. We don't need anything else but to hear the words. And so sometimes for me, that was the most powerful tool to use. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jim Brumby. This is a great book. Congratulations.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed it immensely. I have two questions. First of all, the way you went about writing it. You've got the sections from 1996, and you've got the sections mainly set around here in 2018. So did you write the chapters sort of as they appear in the book, or did you sort of write them chronologically and then cut and splice it? And then secondarily, my interpretation of your view of the commission is that it lacked closure. There was insufficient closure, and I won't give the story away, but I think that was borne out in the story. Is that a reasonable recognition of your position, or is it a bit more nuanced than that?
Yeah, thank you. So the first question, I did write it back and forth, 1996 to 2018, largely because I knew by the time I sat down that I wanted to write this book with a sort of suspenseful craft, and leaving a little bit in the past, and then revealing slowly but surely through the present, like what happened when she met this person. Essentially, she goes out to dinner, and and this guy she met back in 1996 shows up at dinner with her husband, and she doesn't want her husband to know that she's met him, and she's had a very serious interaction with him in South Africa. So you're sort of sitting through this meal, and it's not going so well for her. This is a really bad meal, but she, it's her husband's colleague, and she's got to sort of fake this. And throughout the dinner, she begins to realize that this person doesn't necessarily want to hide it with her. So, so I needed to sort of build the tension between these 2 years. But to answer your other question, when I left in 1996, I had to write a paper for my final year of law school, and I wrote that paper not being able to answer that question about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Was this enough? Did they do enough? Did it bring closure? And I will never forget the two women who testified about their husbands having gone missing. And very often, while I was sitting there, the people whose families had disappeared 20 or 15 years earlier, they never knew. They didn't know until that very moment that I was sitting there that what had happened to their family members. So as they were hearing it, I was hearing it, that their children had died or had been murdered. Their husbands had been kidnapped and tortured. And so they were, I'm sitting in the balcony, and I'm watching them learn about this at the moment. And some of them were able to sort of testify, and they got up and they would say, "But you didn't come to me. You didn't say sorry to me. You didn't tell me what had happened to my children. You've had all this time, and now you want me to forgive you? And now I should just let this go?" So, for me, ultimately, the story was about how does one individual, who's affected in this way, not a whole country, because we know what they were trying to do for the country, but how does an individual who's been victimized by its own government, a government that is supposed to protect its citizens but does not, how do they forgive? How do they move on? Is it enough for them? And I don't know if I have the answer to that question, but I think they had the answer to that question. And some of them said, absolutely not. I will never forgive them. Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
All right, Lauren, we will end like this. What's your favorite word?
I cannot say it here. And if you know me, you know what the word is.
What's your least favorite word?
Can't.
What sound do you love?
My youngest daughter's laughter.
If there is such a thing as heaven, when you arrive at those gates, what would you like to be said to you upon entry?
This is one of my favorite shows, by the way.
Mine too.
You just squeezed by, Lauren. You got it here.
Well, I will say in this page-turning book that you have written, my friend, and in those incredible boots that you are wearing, and with all of the flair and style that you represent and show on and off the page, we are glad that you squeezed by for some time with us at Politics and Prose.
Thank you.
Good for Lauren, you all.
Thank you.